Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. Are you at a crossroads in your life? Are you at a fork in the road and you're navigating life transitions? You're going to want to listen to this episode. If you are, as we call, in the aging process of life, we're all aging. It's just, are we at that point where we're noticing differences? Mentally, emotionally, physically, and we're navigating maybe more anxiety. We are trying to find balance in our life. We are feeling lost, stuck, confused. This episode is for you. We talk about all those things and we break down how to work through them because at the end of the day, we want to know, how do I feel better? How do I navigate these transitions the healthiest way possible? One of the tools I give for free is the journal. You can grab it at Kristen, Kristend, Boyce.com/free resources. You can grab it in the show notes. Everything will be linked there. So if you need any resources, look at the show notes and join the newsletter list. I just send things out once a week. It's not a sales pitch for anything. It just gives you resources. It gives you an article I've written, any speaking events, what I have coming up, and resources. At the end of the day, we all want resources on how to feel better. And when we feel better, we do better. And I am here to tell you, you matter, you're important, you're lovable, and you're here for a reason. We all came in with an assignment, if you will, and we all have different ones. So what is yours? So let me tell you about today's guest. Dr. Carrie Ditzel holds a doctoral degree in clinical psychology from California School of Professional Psychology. She is licensed to practice in New York and New Jersey and is a certified clinical telemental health provider. She specializes in geropsychology, and we break what that means down, and treating the impact of medical conditions on mental health. She is a practicing psychologist and clinical manager at Baker Street Behavioral Health, a multidisciplinary behavioral health clinic providing services across the lifespan. And that's key, services across the lifespan. What do we do when we get older and we have all these feelings that come up and we're trying to navigate all these changes that no one talks about and these transitions? We hit all those things today, and I'm excited for you to listen. So if you get a lot out of this episode, share it on social. Share it with your family and friends. Start deeper conversations. We're thirsty for deeper, more meaningful conversations. You be the trailblazer for it. And without further ado, enjoy this conversation, and I hope it makes a difference in your life. Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am so excited for our conversation today because every single one of us goes through life transitions. No one gets out of this for free. I mean, everybody's going to go through life transitions, no matter if you're going through getting married, you're having a child, maybe you're going for infertility. I'm having a day where I did not get a lot of sleep. So everybody that's listening, just know it's normal to have these days where the words don't come out right. And my guest really helps so many people through transitions. Dr. Carrie, welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
I really was drawn to you because I had not, and I'll be honest, I had not heard the term. Now, I butchered it before because this is how my brain is glitching from sleep deprivation. So if I glitch it, just tell me.
Geropsychology.
Geropsychology. Thank you.
Yes.
Geropsychology. Tell us what that is and how you got into this field.
Yes. So geropsychology is a really broad term to encapsulate dealing with emotional or mental cognitive issues related to aging. Pretty simple. I got into this field by way of a job that put me full-time working in skilled nursing facilities or nursing homes. They're all otherwise called assisted living facilities. And I loved it. I always loved hospital-based work. And in the transition of post-licensure, I ended up in this job in this space. And I was there every day doing bedside therapy. I was in some places where people were there for a very long time and dealing with the culture of living in an institution. And here are people that are older adults, maybe dealing with, well, definitely dealing with lots of medical conditions. And some of the same things that you deal with when you're living in a dormitory was coming up, and people adjusting and people dealing with their care and all of that. So I loved all of that. I love the action of it, believe it or not. And that's really where what do they call it? Bit into this field. And I spent about 12 to 15 years there, in various roles within that company and in those settings. And when I was there, I was seeing there is a need to help people before they get to that stop in life. And there's different circumstances by which people will end up in a care facility such as that. But a lot of people would come in after a hospitalization. They broke their hip, heart attack, or something, and they're recovering and they're doing some intensive PT, and then they're going to go home. Well, talking to those individuals, they're still living life out in the world, and now they have to adjust back. And there were things that maybe could have prevented their decline to the point where they had that hospitalization. And I always had that in the back of my head, and life and different transitions of my own brought me now to Baker Street Behavioral Health, where we are an outpatient-based service. And I'm able to see those clients and see people that are going through issues of aging, medical conditions and such, and try to help them optimally function, successfully navigate some of those transitions. So that's kind of the journey. I started in the trenches, as I say, and now here we are in the outpatient space, although we do a little hospital-based work as well still.
You are so needed. You are so needed. So many people feel lost when they're making these transitions. The families feel lost. The person feels lost and overwhelmed. They don't know. It feels like the overwhelm is so great. Can you talk
Well,
about that?
definitely. And you know why I think that is because oftentimes there's a lack of control. Something has happened, an illness, an injury, something related to aging. Like something has happened where all of a sudden I'm in a hospital and now the hospital is telling me I need this and that. And everybody's in a bit of a crisis mode as to what we do next. And we don't think about those moments as we're living life. Of course, you don't think, what if I get really hurt and I have to go to a hospital and then I can't take care of myself for 6 months? What am I going to do? So the overwhelm, I think, is a bit of lack of information and not planning. It's not like something we're going to plan for, but we don't plan for this. And then when you're in that situation, it's a fast moving system. And sometimes there's not a lot of control over what you can do. And whenever we're not in control of our situation, or there's not very predictable situation, our stress is going to go up. And we're going to, in this situation, especially if you're having a medical condition, and there's an exacerbation to what you're going through if you're increasingly stressed and upset. It's hard to get well when you're upset and stressed. So it's a really tough spot for that particular issue when somebody might need some long extended care making those decisions, for sure. And so as the psychologist in the room, I try to kind of lower the temperature, offer like, what are the paths in front of us? And we don't like these paths, but which path seems the most palatable to everybody and why? And if I have a family going through something like that, that's how I approach it as the therapist, because I'm not a social worker. I'm not a case manager. I can't help them with those nitty gritty details, but I can help them slow down and feel a little more control over making the decisions in front of them, even if it's not what they want.
That's really helpful to slow it down. How do you handle, because this has happened to so many of us, okay? We feel like we're having trouble processing the information. One, we might have had to have a surgery. We're having a medical issue. Our brain isn't firing and wiring like mine wasn't earlier. So it's like, it's natural for the brain, if it's going through something, been through a trauma, to not be able to process the information. And you almost go into kind of a freeze state, a shutdown state. How do you
Definitely.
help clients or people through that part that feels challenging?
Yeah, well, I actually think the help comes with the helper to that person. And so if somebody's in the freeze state and they are going through a major medical trauma, it doesn't mean that they can't make their own decisions, but having a trusted person to just be that second set of ears, help think through some of those decisions is just so important. Now, if you don't have one of those people, I would say that to whomever who's in front of you at the hospital or wherever you may be, and be very clear. Like, I don't feel comfortable making a decision right now. Give me a minute. Just slow that pace down for yourself. So again, that fast paced world of moving people along. And it doesn't mean that they're not giving you good recommendations. I don't want to imply that. There's a level of trust that you have to have, the people that are caring for you. But if you want to kind of have a minute to wrap your head around, turn to the people in your life to give you that hand if you can. And if you can't, tell them, I need a minute. And most facilities, most hospitals have a social worker, have a counselor. That's what they're there to do, to help you be that support person to talk through some things with so you can make a good, sound decision.
That's really helpful to have somebody that can be, if possible, whether a social worker at the hospital or someone
Yeah.
trusted, to help
Yes.
you process and navigate
Yeah.
those decisions.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, as we're aging, this is what I hear from a lot of clients. Like, my memory isn't great. I can't remember, like, what was I in the room for? And
Yeah.
it scares them. They're like, is
Yeah.
this mean I'm cognitively declining or I have dementia or something else is going on?
Mhm.
How
Yeah.
do you help people sort through that?
Well, first, I usually tell clients that are sitting in front of me, like, yeah, welcome. I barely remember getting here too today. There is so much normalcy to that kind of automatic going through the flow of life and suddenly waking up. And we hear this all the time. I drove to work and I don't even remember my drive because our brains are so complicated and complex that there's a lot of times we're on autopilot. And that does not mean that you have a cognitive issue or your brain is aging in a deteriorating way, but there is normal aging that we may see. And depending on your age, depending on your lifestyle, depending on the various medical circumstances that you've had throughout your life, you may see it sooner than your neighbor or your best friend. But I tell people not to panic. I say, what are you forgetting? We go through it. Well, I forgot why I walked in the room. Okay, did you figure it out? Like, yeah, okay. Or I forget where my keys were and I take forever to find it. Okay. Now that could be aging and that could be anxiety, being distracted, being stressed. Stress to me is the daily experience of stress that we all go through. It doesn't mean it's anxiety, which is the clinical term. I could get on a soapbox about the overuse of that term, which I'm sure you could agree with me. But there's a lot of things that can interfere with tagging a memory and keeping a memory. So first I try to normalize a little bit. Say, let's not panic. And then what's the consequence? Okay, you're forgetting to pay your bills. That's something we need to think about and see and explore if there's something bigger there. So functionality is where I go with people when they start to worry. Forgetting names, things, the room, short-term stuff doesn't worry me as much as I kind of forgot to eat for the last few days. I didn't feel hungry, or I forgot some important bills, or I forgot to file my taxes, like something big and consequential, or the classic when you hear of, people leave the stove on and I left a pot of water boiling and I completely forgot and left the house. Well, okay, let's now take a breath and think about this. And for me, that often entails a referral to a medical professional, like a neurologist, or even to some neuropsych testing to kind of see what's going on. My end of things is helping that person come to terms with, like, okay, this is something or this is not, and then encouraging them and helping them follow through with going and getting that done. It can be very scary. And sometimes people put it off for a long time, understandably. So helping feel comfortable that whatever the results, we'll handle it. You'll handle it. It does not mean you're getting pulled out of your house. It doesn't mean you're losing everything. There's lots of interventions now for memory that can be given.
That's helpful. So don't lose hope if you're having any
No,
fears.
no, no.
There's options
Yes,
here.
there's
So
lots of
don't
options.
panic.
There are medications, there's cognitive treatments, there's different techniques you could use in your daily life. Remind you and prompt you. It is not a sentence to have some cognitive decline that's notable. It does not have to mean what people often imagine it meaning.
Yes. I always call them
Yeah.
brain cues. Like, a lot of times if we have brain cues, like put a Post-it up so you can
Mhm.
see it, or a picture of something, or a reminder on your phone, and you have to not ignore the reminders. Like,
Yes.
these things are brain cues. They can cue you into the
Mhm.
where you're trying to
Yeah.
focus or what you need to get done so you remember it.
Yeah. And often with an aging group, so I'm talking about people probably over the 70-year mark range, the cognitive impact of depression and anxiety can look like dementia. So it can be misdiagnosed. And it's extremely important as a practitioner, myself or medical doctors or anybody that somebody in that age range gets in front of, to think about before we just assume it's dementia or something like that, to say, is there depression or anxiety here? Because, a younger person, we all look for that. We don't expect you to have a cognitive problem if you come in saying, I haven't showered for days and I'm not remembering things. We immediately say, what's happening with your mood? We have to make sure we do the same thing for that age range because depression and anxiety exists throughout the lifespan.
That's helpful for someone that's listening to really put in the back of your mind to know,
Yeah,
assess for anxiety and depression in that age group. I think that's
absolutely.
true along the lifespan, like you said,
Yeah,
but it's
no,
not as
definitely.
obvious maybe that
It,
that's the issue versus
right. And it's a little bit about kind of like leaning into our stereotypes and our laurel, leaning back into like, well, they're old, so they're probably having aging cognitive decline. I'm not saying that that's not true, but we should parallel look for anxiety and depression.
uh,
And those treatments, older adults responsive to as well.
yeah, that's helpful to
Yeah.
kind of consider. You sparked my let's talk about that curiosity about overdoing anxiety, like overdiagnosing anxiety. And let's
Okay.
talk about that. What are you seeing? What are your thoughts on it?
So these are my thoughts as a practicing psychologist. And what I see in general in the world is it's trendy. It's a quick word to talk about stress now. I think it's getting confused with stress that is typical that we all have to cope with. So I have little kids. I have elementary school kids, and I've heard my 10-year-old say anxiety. I'm like, I know I'm a psychologist, but I don't use that word. Where are you getting that? It's so pervasive in our culture now to call any feeling of discomfort or nervousness anxiety. And as a clinician, I don't call something anxious until we're hitting some of those symptoms like overwhelm. Your body is kind of overwhelmed by it. You have some physical symptoms, perhaps. You can't redirect yourself and it's persistent, and all those times, all those things that we look at as clinicians to make a diagnosis. Whereas many times people are talking about stress. Stress, we all have it. And what happens when we have stress? Our body does exactly what it's supposed to do. It kicks up a little bit into flight to kind of protect us. And I say this to clients all the time. Back in the Stone Age, it was the bear coming into our cave. So we fought or we hid or we flew and ran away, and our body turned everything else off, reasoning, hunger, all so that our body could use that nervous system to get there. Now in the modern world, little things can trigger the same thing. Am I going to fail my test? Am I going to make it to work on time? Is my boss going to give me a bad review? All these things that go on in our head can kick up little mini fight flight reactions. And you can manage that with stress management techniques. And that is actually adaptive in many cases. It makes you work hard. It makes you study for your test. It's not a bad thing unless you don't manage it. And then if it's not managed and it's persistent, or other things have happened to you in your life that really overwhelmed your system, like traumas, etc., then we're in the anxious realm. So I am very cautious with clients to use the word stress in certain situations versus anxiety. Even people with anxiety say, this is not your anxiety disorder. This is stress. This is life. It was the holidays. Yeah, we all had stress. It's not because you're an anxious person that you were stressed. And help normalizing in a way. And that also can help people detach from some of the labels that they may have kind of really grasped onto, which aren't bad for a while, but it's good to detach from it a little bit and see yourself as a regular person, like we all are, that gets stressed. So that's my soapbox version
I
of
love it.
my thought,
I think that's
right?
so
That's my
true.
soapbox version. Yeah.
'Cause we
Yeah.
have overused the word anxious, and it's like we almost attach that to anything dysregulating. You're anxious.
Hmm. Yep. And I mean, what happened to the word nervous? I liked
Well,
nervous,
that
you
went
know?
away, didn't it?
Yeah. What happened to nervous? I mean, listen, I have family members that are more nervous than others. Maybe we should have called them anxious, but we didn't back then. So we called them nervous. But I like that word because it does describe it's normal to have some nervousness. It's normal to get a little stressed. We can't expect to go through life not feeling anything. Even anxiety. You can even have a bout of anxiety while you're under a situation or a time in your life. It does not mean you anxious all the time. And it doesn't
You're an
mean every time you
anxious
feel
person.
something. Yeah, it doesn't mean that
It's
at all, in
that's
my
like an
opinion.
identity. It can become an identity, and that's what you're
Yes.
saying. my identity is I'm anxious person. Well, are you, or is it just situational, or is there unresolved trauma underneath it that needs to be cleared up? And I
Yeah.
hear you. It's not a label in your identity.
Yeah. And I also talk to people about how we all live on a spectrum. And I use myself as an example. When under stress, when under a unusual situation, do you lean depressed or do you lean anxious? People look at me funny. I'm like, everybody leans a certain way.
Mhm.
Think about the people who are like, when they're not quite themselves, are they mopey and down in the dumps? Or are they spinning around like a top and irritable and anxious? We all have a tendency. And if you can understand your own tendency, then you can look at it as a little more a part of life and not something to be scared by.
I love
You
the
know,
question.
I say I run anxious. I tell my
I was going to
clients, I'm
say,
like, listen, I
I
run
would run
anxious.
anxious too. I
I
mean,
run
there's
anxious.
no question. I
Yeah, when
love
I'm under
that.
stress. And when I'm under stress, that's when and you know where I got that from? My father. My father, God rest his soul, he just passed this summer. And he was a police officer, a town police officer in my little town in New Jersey. And I remember this from my childhood, him talking about his work and saying, like, listen, you're dealing with people in their worst moment as a police officer. So you got to let them be. Like, you can't react to them because you just have to try to help because it's their worst moment. And that stuck with me. And I kind of then adapted that idea to I'm usually seeing people, at least for the first time, after some of their worst moments. So I'm not going to say this is you always. This is you after your worst moment. And let's get you back to center. And then let's detach from that identity. So it's all relates back to your own childhood, really. If anybody thinks therapists didn't have their own stuff,
It's a
it
sham.
all
It's a
comes.
sham, is
I
what
know
I'm
it's a sham.
saying. It would be a disservice to our clients to be like, oh, I had this perfect childhood. It'd be a sham.
Yeah,
They would not trust us worth a minute. And I love your dad's wisdom. I mean, what wisdom that stuck with you.
it
And that
did. And I
now
apply it now.
you're
Mhm.
bringing it into all your clients. Like,
Yeah.
okay, this is their worst moment. Let's help you get back to center. Let's help you get back to this feeling of being here and now and okay.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I love that. What a gift.
Yeah.
What a
Yeah.
gift he gave. And now you're giving
Yeah.
it to everybody else and our
It's good. It
audience.
lives
I love
on.
this. And I like this question. Like, what if we ask this question to people? Do you tend to run more anxious or run more depressed? I mean, this
Yep.
is, or something along those lines. How would you phrase the
Hmm.
question if you were going to use this in
Yeah.
conversation?
I typically would say something like, as we get to know each other and I get to know you, I want you to think about when you're under stress, a hard day, something not going great. Where do you lean? We all lean along a spectrum. We either kind of are more sad, depressed, or anxious, hyper, gotta go kind of thing. Where would you put yourself on that line and give the person a minute to reflect? And usually people understand themselves right away, but they've never been asked that question or thought about it that way.
Wouldn't this be great if you also asked this in premarital therapy? So, if you're in a relationship with anyone, you're like, oh, you tend to run more anxious too. I mean, right. Or you
Yeah, right?
best. And you have more
Yeah.
of a understanding. And now we can work on how do we get ourselves back to baseline and hold some compassion
Yes.
when that might get activated and
And
use our tools to
tolerance.
calm ourselves
Yeah.
down. Yeah.
And tolerate. We see this with people in relationships and therapy. One person shuts down and one person is, come on, come on, come on. And we help them understand that cycle. It's very similar emotionally. When you're under stress, when things are not great, what do you tend to kind of hole up and get quiet? Or do you go, go, go?
And I'd love to look at the
My house,
history too on that.
oh yeah. My house is very clean when I'm anxious
You're like, and
because
you're gonna
we are gonna
mobilize that. You're gonna
sweep at
mobilize
everything.
that. Exactly. You look through and you go, oh, this makes sense. And then if you go through, not to blame our parents or anything, but oh,
Yeah.
dad ran anxious, mom ran depressed. Oh, this is
Hmm.
all kind of making sense. And then how did I respond to that? So I think it's good. And then as life transitions happen, right? It can kick up one of
Oh,
those
for sure.
two things. And especially if someone's gotten diagnosed with a health issue. I know you said you work with Parkinson's. A lot of
Hmm.
clients maybe just got diagnosed with something or Parkinson's in particular. Talk about that. When someone gets diagnosed with autoimmune, it could be autoimmune, it could
Hmm.
be a new diagnosis like Parkinson's or any kind
Yeah.
of a health issue. Walk
Yeah.
through what that's like, and then how do you help people through it?
So I feel like there are some stages different people may go through. And I think about a little bit the stages of grief that we all kind of know about, and they can apply as well, like disbelief. Some people just disbelief. I don't know what this doctor's talking about. I feel fine, etc. But more likely, or more often, I should say, I see people get either scared, understandably, and those negative cognitions about what's going to happen to me and the worries and the what ifs kick in. So that's an anxious response. If it becomes overwhelming, it's normal to be scared and all that. But if it overwhelms you and it kind of immobilizes you, that's oftentimes when I see people because it's more than what they can bear or their caregivers and loved ones. So I think fear is a huge and what if, and
Mhm.
obviously, understandably, you imagine the worst case scenario. And then there is the opposite on the spectrum, kind of shutting down, feeling like my life is over, kind of kind of a feeling. And that is the other side of the coin. So once you get the diagnosis, I think first you got to deal with the medical providers, get a treatment plan in place, and then where therapy can come in and what I do with individuals is help with those thoughts, try to neutralize them a little by still acknowledging how scary and upsetting this is. We don't deny that, but you are here now. Let's remind ourselves how we are still functioning and then dig in and buy into whatever their treatment plan is so that they can follow it along to gain some sense of control. Because so often it's all about, this thing happened to me and I don't have control and what will happen. And for our stress management, when we have some predictability and a little bit of control, we're going to feel a lot better. So I try to help people find something in those two areas to grasp onto. And that's kind of where we start. And then as the condition maybe progresses or different things happen, we adjust. We adjust to the change. We adjust to a loss in functioning. We adjust to a role change. Role transitions
Mhm.
are things I talk a lot about. Becoming a patient, suddenly now you can't do some of the things in the household and the other person's doing it and they don't do it as well. And they can't fold the laundry the way you did or keep up with the bills or whatever. And there could be interpersonal strain there. So we'll work through that a little bit. And I often work with the caregivers. I don't love that word, care partner, spouse, person in their life, their child, whoever, working together so they can resolve that role change with a little less conflict and a little more acceptance. And then that helps as well. And their quality of the relationship helps or improves. And that's kind of the flow, if that addresses what you're talking about, the various little clinical adjustments that people are going to go through often.
I think the biggest one is grief. I really think that's a huge component because
Hmm.
you're grieving over what you had and what now it is, and you're working towards that
Yeah.
acceptance. And
Yeah.
then so is the partner, so is the person or the family member that's really trying to
Hmm.
walk alongside this person. They also have their grief.
It happens to everybody. We say that the disease, whatever it is, happens to everybody. It's different for everybody. And yes, you're living with it, but it's happening to everybody.
I think that is so big to say out loud. It's happening to everybody. So if you're
Hmm.
going through a diagnosis of some sort or you're going through something major, it happens to everybody. It
Hmm.
affects the family members that are walking
Yes.
alongside you, whether they're
Hmm.
your kids, a partner,
Yeah. Yeah.
grandkids, it doesn't matter. It's affecting
Yeah.
everybody because things are changing. Roles are changing, to your point.
Yes. And the other thing I see often is the patient, so to speak, kind of moves quicker often in the grief process or in the acceptance process than sometimes the people around them. And I use the analogy of having a baby in a traditional sense, carrying a child. And if it's a woman, I can say this. And if it's a man, I have rapport, I can make a joke. I can say, you have 9 months where your body is changing. You feel that change. You know it's happening. There's an experience that you're living with. And then you have this child, and there's your husband saying, "Oh my gosh, now I can't sleep." And you were like, hello, weren't you? This has been coming all the time. And I get a lot of laughs and it warms people up. And I say, this is not all that different. You are living with it in your body. You feel it every day. You can feel different symptoms. And so you're going to move quicker than maybe someone else in your life in terms of the process of grief and understanding what you can and can't do That's huge. That body, if I can help a patient get in tune with their body to know what they can do or can't do and make adjustments, they may still be able to do a whole lot for themselves, especially with Parkinson's. And Parkinson's is one of those things where it's funny. Some days you wake up and it's there, and some days you're like, yeah, I kind of feel better today. And I'm a little more loose and limber, especially in the earlier stages. So I encourage people to, if you feel like you can make a safe decision, go do what you want to do. Go for a walk. Do what you think is healthy for you. And you have a caregiver, a spouse, a daughter. No, don't go. You can't go. Opening every door and shuffling them along. And that's because they're not in your body. And communication with caregivers and patients and all of that stuff is what we have to work on for a successful transition. And, it just ensures the quality of those relationships. If this is the last phase of life, how do you want to be with the people you love? You want to be peaceful. You want to have some of that old feeling. And if we're only focusing on the illness and only focusing on what to do or not to do, it takes a little bit of that away. So therapy and talking and working through this can really be helpful for the whole family system to make everybody feel better through it.
That's helpful to know for folks. Just communicate.
Yeah.
We say communication and we mean communication. And
I mean, in the moment saying,
yeah,
when you open the door for me, it makes me irritated because I can open my own door. Like, do it, say it.
And that's what I try to empower clients to do. It's like we're constantly empowering folks to communicate in a healthy way in real time. In real time. It's like if the sooner to real time we can get, the better. Now we can always take a pause, take a moment to ground, center, and then say it if we need to. We feel really dysregulated. It's one of the keys, I think, to navigating transitions.
Yeah, I agree. Medical issues hit all ages. So a lot of what we draw from geropsychology, in part just because statistically they might be faced with more debilitating or degenerative issues. You get diagnosed with diabetes, you get diagnosed with an autoimmune disease in your 30s or 40s. The concept of yourself and what you might have to integrate into your life or the changes you may have to make in a lifestyle sense, all of these things can be really difficult because there is a loss. Gut health is huge in terms of the different types of gastro issues you can have really affect your lifestyle because of food and eating and all of that stuff. So we were talking about this in the sense of older adults and some of the illnesses that affect older adults, but the concepts are the same in many ways for younger people too.
Yes. Is there anything we didn't cover that you feel like is important?
I'm just going to reiterate this idea that stress is normal and you can deal with stress by finding a place where you can control a little bit of the situation and find some predictability in the situation. Often we feel a bit out of control, but if we stop and think, we kind of know what's coming. We kind of know what's going to happen. We know the options in front of us. So remind yourself that you actually know a lot more. I think life is a little more predictable than we sort of get a bit credit for. And gain a little control, even if it's in your own thoughts. And now those two kind of umbrella concepts are really a great place to start to manage that stress response that feels like anxiety, that can be anxiety, that we call anxiety. That would be the thing I would just put a point on with this whole discussion. And that is going to happen during times of transition, any transition you're going through. Think about what you could predict about it and think about what you can control about it.
Perfect. Okay. Do you have any book recommendations on this topic? Like, do you have anything that comes to mind? If you don't, that's fine.
Yeah. The one I can think of, it's old. I mean, it's going to show my age, but do you remember Who Moved My Cheese?
Oh,
it's like a teeny tiny.
Spencer somebody, right?
I actually have it on my shelf here. Who Moved My Cheese? It's quick. It's easy. Change is going to happen and you're going to thrive if you move along with the change. So I like that one.
Awesome. What has been a book that has made the biggest difference in your life? And it doesn't have to do with this. It doesn't have to be with this topic. What's one that just kind of, it has stuck with you. It has made an impact in your life. Can you think of any that come to mind?
I want to say something a little more general than that, if that's okay.
Yeah, it could be any book.
I have picked up historical fiction novels, like about different women and then post World War II, and they're on the coast of Italy, and they're doing this and doing that, and their stories as my beach reads, as my evening reads. I'm not a huge reader. I think I shared with you in the audience that I have 2 young kids. It's a fast-paced life. If I pick up a book at 8 o'clock at night, I'm falling asleep at 8:30.
Yes.
So, however, I have found that picking up these fun, sort of put me in another world type of books, when I can find that pocket, it actually is de-stress. It helps with my own stress management. And I've made a commitment over the last several months and going forward to really, instead of scrolling my phone, which really doesn't de-stress me, right, which we all suffer from, picking up that book, even if it's for a couple pages. So, and I really found those books I love, and they just put me in another world, and I imagine being there, and I love the fantasy of it. So it's not a particular book, but find something that's
Style
fun
of book,
for
like
you.
a genre
Yeah.
of books that you
Yeah.
really
I
enjoy.
love that genre. Yeah. But as a recommendation to your audience, find something fun. Don't read self-help books. If you are already in therapy and you're therapied out, like have a little fun with your reading or your things like that.
Switch it up. Switch it up.
Yeah.
And this is my 2025. I am getting off the phone more, and I am put it on my list. Like, this is what my heart is telling me to do. Read more.
Mhm.
It's good
Mhm.
for the soul, whether it's this, you're finding your genre of historical fiction and different
Yeah.
time periods or whatever it is. Like,
Yeah.
do
Or
more of
pick up
it.
a magazine. Pick up a
Yes,
magazine again.
whatever.
A silly magazine that you just flip through a real page again.
I love holding a book.
For sure.
I've gone to the library and I have like this stack. I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, I am not going to get through 10 library books. It's going to be
Very ambitious.
city. Yeah. It's just because I got excited. I was like, I'm going to get these books. I'm going to get,
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
doesn't,
I got it.
yeah. So replacing the scrolling with something else. And I think this is just universally noticing how you feel when you're on doing that. And then
Yeah.
when you switch it up with something else, no matter what that something else is, and notice the difference.
Yeah. It's all back to our nervous system, what's activating our nervous system and what's calming our nervous system and the times of day. And we're a full organism and we can't ignore those pieces of ourselves.
Yes, I agree. Dr. Carrie, thank you so much for being on the Close the Chapter podcast. I loved our conversation, could talk for hours. Thank you so much. Where can people find you if they're interested in just learning more about you?
Yes, you could find me on my practice's website, which is Baker Street. So it's www.bakerstreetpsych.com. And there's some blurbs about me and some of our other directors and what we do here. But I also welcome you to reach out to me through that website if you have any questions or want to talk.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Carrie. It was so good talking to you. Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, Boice.com. Thanks and have a great day.